Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a somewhat ambush stream, at least in the sense that I only prepared it a couple hours ago. This is an entry into a somewhat irregular series I've done over the course of the last several years, looking at the intersection of social justice and mental health, or these days more like DEI/social justice/mental health, and so on. Previous entries in this series more or less have focused on one particular individual, more often than not, a family counselor out of California, I believe, Dr. Chris Hoff, but I've looked at other things over the course of the series in the last several years. And this popped up from the New York Times Magazine, I believe just yesterday or the day before. And when I saw the headline, oh boy, I knew I had to take a look. And I thought you might find it interesting too. But before we get into that, who's joining me this morning, this beautiful Monday morning? Tack Alpaca, John Miller, Mike Savage, Blarg, Somnamnul Nation, Noah Essentio, Brittany Holland. Happy birthday again, Brittany. Resolute Germ, Robert Pincus, Twisted Skipster. Twisted Skipster, just as you probably already know, but it looks like Tracy's GoFundMe or a fundraiser hit its goal. I found that out the other day, so yay! And Non-Vitae Rex, good morning. Speaking of fundraisers, if you'll avert your attention, how about direct your gaze to the top of the chat box? A couple of links there for some fundraisers for our friends Moonshock and Angry Illinoisian. They both experienced some health issues that have debilitated them and caused their families some difficulty. If you can throw a couple of bucks their way, that would be appreciated. If not, that's fine. But if you can share those out on social media, that would also be appreciated. And Ostzan, good morning. Bruno Montiero, good morning. And anybody else who is either joining in late or lurking or in the future, good morning. So let's get into this. I haven't read this yet. I know only the highest level details about it. The therapy issue, here it comes. I'm a couples therapist. Something new is happening in relationships. For more and more of Orna Guralnik's patients, the ideas behind Black Lives Matter and hashtag Me Too are leading to breakthroughs at home. The ideas behind Black Lives Matter and Me Too. So two social movements that, at least in one instance, has primarily been used as a way to gain money from people that goes into people's million-dollar mansions, and in the other instance has mostly been used to completely vilify men and elevate women into a perpetual victim status. Okay. All right. Well, I can't wait to find out how this applies in the home. One afternoon in 2020, early in the pandemic, I met Sylviolet, if I'm saying that correctly, Sylviolet and Matthew for a virtual session. Young, idealistic, deeply in love, they were also prone to dramatic fights. In this session, Sylviolet, a vivacious essayist and spoken word poet, was trying to describe the ways she felt Matthew, a measured medical student, was trying to control her, in this case by trying to dissuade her from buying a slushie. Okay. He thought they should keep to a tight budget until after he became a doctor and achieved financial stability. Then she could have, quote, all the slushies you want later, unquote. Sylviolet found this reasoning maddening, especially since he seemed to imply she was reckless. Slushy. Okay. On the face of it, the fight seemed insignificant. But then an exchange took place that changed the tenor of the argument, connecting us to the underlying roots of the issue. Quote, I have trouble envisioning that finish line, unquote, Sylviolet exclaimed, tearing up. Quote, because the plan that he's talking about, my life has always been, the plan never works. You can do all the right things. You can obey all the right rules and get expletive, unquote. I'm going to assume she was talking about excrement for that expletive, but who knows? For a moment, Matthew continued to try to reason with her and convince her of his sound financial strategy. Quote, I know that sounds very conceited, cocky, unquote, he said, to which Sylviolet whipped back, quote, no, it sounds privileged, unquote. She described her family's relationship to money. They'd had nothing but trauma for generations. Sylviolet resented Matthew's pride in his plan. Quote, "A privileged setting gave you access to all these things," she said. Quote, "You're taking ownership over it like I did it according to plan, as if, like, if other people did it according to plan, it would work out," unquote. Okay, well, before I dive any deeper into this, if we're talking about spending habits and frivolity when you're on a tight budget, yeah, slushies can add up, and maybe the slushies are just emblematic of another more serious pattern of spending. But yeah, no, every plan does not necessarily work out the way you want. But I'll tell you what, having a plan and sticking to it is often better than not and just winging it. Of course, we're depending on what we're talking about. But if we're looking at money matters, then yeah, sticking to a plan is the best idea. But no, I can't have slushies because you're privileged in having a plan. I came from a background where plans don't work out. Okay. With the mention of the word privilege, Matthew came around to realizing they were talking about forces larger than themselves. No, they weren't. They're talking about spending habits. They're talking about managing your finances wisely. Okay, so, but as soon as privilege is invoked, once the magic word is spoken, well then the higher powers are invoked. Okay. Each of them was African American, but he came from a financially stable family. His parents, a firefighter and a bank manager, followed a middle-class trajectory and did well. Did they have a plan by any chance? Quote, "Let me rephrase," Matthew said carefully, signaling to Sylviolet that he could see how his certainty about his future reflected his class background. His certainty about his, you mean having a plan? Quote, "I recognize that if it wasn't for my parents' credit score, my loans to get, okay, so I get that," unquote. So if it wasn't for your parents' hard work, and I'm assuming sticking to a financial plan, then you would not have benefited from your parents' honest labor and smart decisions, and now that's something that you have to apologize for. That's the sense I'm getting here. Okay, as the relevance of class and race came into class and race. What? Okay, as the relevance of class and race came into focus, Sylviolet's rage transformed into deep sorrow, generations of poverty weighing heavily on her. Quote, "I cannot stop thinking that we're going to go bankrupt," unquote. Well, I'll tell you what, if you keep buying slushies when you can't afford them, you certainly will go there quicker. She worried that they might even be evicted. Quote, "I wish I could believe what you believe," unquote, she told Matthew, "so instead just throw up your hands and give up?" He replied, his voice growing tender, quote, "We have the same life now," unquote. He looked at her, exuding care. Quote, "We have to live with the idea, the thinking, the viewpoint that we're going to die old together." Jeez Louise. How about if we stick to a sound financial plan and we make sacrifices and compromises in the short term, in the long term we'll do well once I get my degree and move into my career, etc. And what is Sylviolet's work again? A vivacious essayist and spoken word poet, whereas Matthew is a medical student. Okay, and that's our couple there, Sylviolet and Matthew. One of the most difficult challenges for couples is getting them to see beyond their own entrenched perspectives, to acknowledge a partner's radical otherness. Yes, this is the phrase that drew me to this article because it sounded like my recipe for creating a TEDx talk. You take a word and you put either radical or toxic in front of it, and then reverse engineer the phrase you've created into its own spiel or lecture. Thank you so much, John Miller. It's always annoying how privilege is a cudgel. It's the catch-all term to avoid any actual arguments. Yes. Yes, you come from privilege. Therefore, anything you have to say is invalid. Yes, your privilege makes any successes or failures you've experienced actually not that amazing or impactful. Whereas my successes and or struggles are much more worse because I don't have privilege or something. Yes. Notice how even the author, like, at the invoking of the word privilege. Yeah, it's a magic word. But anyway, let's get back to this. To acknowledge a partner's radical otherness and appreciate difference and sovereignty. Difference and sovereignty. Okay, people talk a good game about their efforts, but it's quite a difficult psychological task. Okay, to be truly open to your partner's experience, you must relinquish your conviction in the righteousness of your own position. Abandon your personal perspectives and critical thinking skills, is what it sounds like. This requires humility and the courage to tolerate uncertainty. What? Coming to see the working of implicit biases on us, grasping that our views are contingent on, let's say, our gender, class background, or skin color, is a humbling lesson. It pushes us beyond assuming sameness, opening up the possibility of seeing our partner's point of view. Well, I have a feeling that Matthew's parents seem to have achieved everything in spite of those same factors and put Matthew in a good position to become a medical doctor. Their honest labor and smart decisions lined their children up for better outcomes than perhaps they themselves had opportunities for in their own lives. And now Matthew must bear the burden of his parents' good work because Sylviolet is paranoid about becoming bankrupt while being an essayist and a spoken word poet. Well, in that case, she might have a point. Holy cats. Okay. Let's see. It pushes us beyond assuming sameness, opening up the possibility of seeing our partner's point of view. Okay, seeing our partner's point of view and capitulating to a point of view are two different things. That's two different things. I've been working as a psychologist seeing individuals and couples since the mid-1990s, and in the past 8 years, I've witnessed a tremendous change in the kinds of conversations couples can have. Not long ago, I would ask a couple about the ways class or race played out between them. Why? Why not talk about them as individuals? Not to say that those things can't have an effect, I suppose, but why don't you let them bring it up first? Why do you feel the need to ask them? Okay. How race or class played out between them. I'd typically be met with an awkward shrug and a change of topic. Yeah, because it's probably irrelevant. Or they didn't come there for a sociology lesson. They came there to talk about their relationships one to another. But recent events have reshaped the national conversation on power, privilege, gender norms, whiteness, and systemic racism. Together, these ideas have pushed us to think, talk, argue, and become aware of the many implicit biases we all carry about our identities, unconscious assumptions that privilege some and inflict harm on others. These insights have also made it easier for people to realize there may be plenty of other unconscious assumptions undergirding their positions. I've been surprised and excited by the impact of this new understanding, and it has all made my work as a couples therapist easier. Yes, well, I mean, if your couples therapy theory was originally framed around talking about race and class, even when they were irrelevant topics to the conversation, you must be thrilled that now you can justify using those as your initial wedge issues. You don't feel like you're pushing at a closed door anymore because it's so common now. You're excited. Okay. There has, of course, been ferocious pushback against many of these ideas. I can't imagine why. Claims that they are divisive or exclusionary. Oh, really? Race class, whiteness, privilege, divisive and exclusionary, you don't say. Hashtag Me Too, BLM, and trans rights, okay, that wasn't mentioned in the opening, have been weaponized in service of the culture wars dominating the media. Yes, they have. They've all been used as cudgels. They've all been used as weapons to drown out debate or rational thought. You're correct. But in my practice, I found that engaging with these progressive movements, yes, dividing people up on the basis of race and gender and relegating some to villains and others to victims, yeah, that's progressive, real progressive. Engaging with these progressive movements has led to deep changes in our psyches. Now that I do believe. I believe being bombarded with some of this messaging from the media and social media and elsewise and places of education are changing psyches. I agree with that one. My patients, regardless of political affiliation, are incorporating the messages of social movements into the very structure of their being. New words make new thoughts and feelings possible. Okay. As a collective, we appear to be coming around to the idea that bigger social forces run through us, animating us and pitting us against one another, whatever our conscious intentions. To invert a truism, the political is personal. Yes, identity politics is really a thing these days. Some 5 years ago, I started working on a documentary series called Couples Therapy. Well, that sounds completely innocuous. I'm sure there's nothing undergirding that at all. Created by the filmmakers Josh Kriegman, Elise Steinberg, and Eli Dupree, and airing on Showtime, that chronicles 18 to 20 weeks of therapy with couples who courageously volunteer to have their sessions filmed. Parenthetical, the couples in this essay were filmed for the show, which makes it possible for me to write about them. Only some of those who are filmed end up on air. Okay. We are now several seasons in. If you say so, I've never heard of it. I was drawn to the project knowing that the directors were committed to an honest, verite portrayal of therapy and to looking at these social factors that thread through people's lives and relationships. I am also a trained psychoanalyst. Okay. Psychoanalysis is about exploring unconscious motivations behind thoughts or actions. It allows people to gain access to how early experiences, vicissitudes of attachment and trauma, have shaped them and to expand their capacity for thought and feeling. For couples, I incorporate systems thinking, a practice that focuses on the system, a couple, say, or a family, and interprets how each individual unconsciously behaves in ways that serve the system as a whole. Okay, well, I'm not much of a psychoanalyst expert, so I might have to throw this over to Gothic Therapy or something at some point and see what they have to say about it. Gothic Therapy, YouTube channel, you should go check them out. But what we mean by unconsciously is an ongoing debate. It's an ongoing debate, so you're committing a practice on something that isn't fully understood. Okay. Freud was known in the late 19th and early 20th centuries for his singular focus on the private interior world. In particular, he wrote about the epic battle between unconscious drives and forces of civilization. Traditional psychoanalysis has mostly focused on early scenes between the young and their caregivers as shaping the psyche, leaving the socio-political context to other disciplines. I am of a later theoretical, too much verbiage here. I am of a later theoretical school that, rather than seeing civilization in conflict with the self, sees the social contract, our relationship to the collectives we belong to, as nested in the deepest corners of our unconscious. For me, psychoanalytic exploration is just as much about our deep ethical dilemmas regarding how to live with one another and our environment as it is about early family dramas. My patients' repressed experiences with the ghosts of their country's history are as interesting as with their mothers. The ghosts of their country's history. Repressed experiences with the ghosts of their country's... Okay. Over the years, I've come to see that one of the most pernicious issues couples struggle with is working through wrongdoing and blame. Oh, You've come to see that. It's not just a matter, of course, in all relationships, especially intimate ones, wrongdoing and blame. You've come to, well, I don't know. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychoanalyst. I haven't gone to college for those things. And I think I could have told you that some of the most pernicious issues with couples is wrongdoing and blame. But then, I don't know, I've been in a relationship or two, so maybe that's just direct experience. The claim, quote, "you hurt me," often sends couples spiraling. People want to feel like good and lovable beings. Their intentions make perfect sense to themselves, and they hate being interpreted as selfish. In psychoanalytic jargon, we often say, quote, "no one likes being the bad object," unquote. In fact, there are a few things people resist more than being held responsible for causing harm. Caveat to that, there are a few things people resist more than being held responsible for causing harm when they did not. That's even worse. Being held to account for something you didn't actually do, being blamed for something and an action that you never took. That might be something else to consider. It immediately threatens to overwhelm the offender, quote unquote, with shame. Am I a bad person? And guilt. Have I caused irreparable damage? Should I be punished? Yes, those are either the tools of someone honestly expressing their feelings or a manipulator. And I've been in the slot for both. I have been manipulated into feeling bad for something I haven't done, and I've also been attempted at made to feel bad for something I haven't done. When I do something wrong and it is obvious to me, I admit it. It's not fun, but it's the adult thing to do. But more often than not, I got to tell you. Anyway, yet serious hurt that goes unacknowledged leads to the accumulation of resentment and a deadening of the relationship. It's true, if you do not speak up and you do not communicate to your partner when something is bothering you, even if it's something that is otherwise petty or innocuous, but you don't say anything and it just builds up and builds up and builds up, it'll eventually come out in ways you probably don't want to, and in ways that are more damaging than if you'd said something early on. It's true. All depends on what we're talking about. Context matters, and what are prime examples so far between Matthew and Sylviolet, Matthew seemed to be punished for doing nothing but trying to be wise with their money and giving in to Sylviolet's paranoia. That's all I got from her primary example so far. So if she doesn't give us any others, I don't know what to tell you. Our ongoing national conversations about systemic biases, you mean like opening up every one of your therapy practices by talking about race and class? That kind of systemic bias in your own practice? Have made it easier for couples to acknowledge wrongdoings by easing people into the idea of unconscious complicity. Tell me you're talking about original sin without saying original sin. Unconscious complicity. Okay, accepting that you are oh my God, accepting that you are part of a complex social system and implicated in its biases, no matter what you tell yourself, can also help you accept that in other aspects of your life, you are partly governed by unconscious forces you do not necessarily recognize. The devil made me do it. The devil made me do it. Yeah. You are a villain. You are a villain. If somebody tells you that you've done wrong, it doesn't matter what the accusation is. It doesn't matter what you think. You need to first think of yourself in terms of the greater system and how somehow, some way, intersectionally, tangentially, through the mystic chords of memory, yes, you really are to blame. So sit back, bow your head, be silent, and take the criticism as for what it is, truth. Without question. Oh, sorry, did I get ahead of myself? Pardon me. Let's move on. Accepting that you are part of a complex social system and implicated in its biases, no matter what you tell yourself, can also help you accept that in other aspects of your life, you are partly governed by unconscious forces you do not necessarily recognize. In Freudian terms, sometimes a drama queen is just a drama queen. In Freudian terms, the ego is not a master in its own house. Okay. In other words, so wait, you make a large statement, then you put in Freudian terms, and then you go to other words. Okay, we got 3 levels of this now. In other words, to know if you've caused harm, it is not enough to ask yourself, quote, did I intend to hurt the other, unquote. You may need to listen to the feedback of others. These insights can have ripple effects beyond an awareness of specific biases, becoming relevant in many aspects of our lives, in our relationships with partners or children, in reviewing our life history. As my friend Nick described it, quote, everything about me was raised to believe I am not racist or privileged, but in recent years, I realize how easy certain things have always been for me simply because I'm white. I am humbled, and that has changed the way Rebecca and I talk with each other. Yes, I must feel guilty for something I have no control over. I must accept any criticism that comes my way because of my skin color and just say, yeah, you know what, you're right. Anything I've achieved, it's not really an achievement. Anything that I've suffered, any difficulty that I've had, they're not really that bad of difficulties. I have it easy because I'm white. So does everybody else who has it white. Has it right. You know what? I might be a racist. A shift in our vocabularies has also played a role. You ain't just whistling Dixie because, racism isn't about, denigrating or elevating anybody on the basis of their skin color anymore. No, it's about power and privilege and the combination thereof. If you don't have any power, you can't actually be racist. I've been told over and over again. Language tends to evolve to better accommodate experiences of the dominant social group. The dominant social group. Leaving other experiences obscured from collective understanding and thus silently perpetuating bias and harm. Got any examples for us? I hope we do. When these gaps are filled by new concepts, social change can follow. Yeah, it's like, calling the homeless the unhoused. Obviously, that changes everything. Or the criminal justice system calling it the criminal legal system. That changes everything, I guess. The expanding lexicon around bias and privilege includes terms like, quote, white fragility. Oh, yeah. Or white tears, referring to white people's defensive refusal to fully engage with accountability. You mean people's discomfort with being accused of wrongdoing for their skin color you're talking about? Yeah, speaking of changing language, speaking of altering lexicons, fully engage with accountability. Is that what accountability? Accountability for what? Being white? Okay. Other phrases like virtue signaling, being a Karen, or performative allyship underline the difference between honest and fake engagement with questions of ethics, morality, and responsibility. These terms have implications beyond race. Then why do you use the color of someone's skin in them? Really? Beyond race. Okay, and I've seen them work their way into the therapy room. You've seen them work their way. You're the one that initially talked to and brought up concepts of race and class with your patients without them bringing them up and then them awkwardly trying to change the topic. But no, they just happened to find their way into your therapy room. I'm sure it was just manifest, right? Just came out of nowhere, just completely spontaneous generation. I'm sure. They've helped couples see the difference between the wish to receive forgiveness and assurance of your goodness and actual concern for the one you offend. I'm going to go over that one again for myself and those in the cheap seats. They've helped couples see the difference between the wish to receive forgiveness and assurance of your goodness and actual concern for the one you offended. Analysts call this distinction the difference between guilt and guiltiness. Is that like truthiness? Okay, guilt entails feeling bad for having harmed another. Conceivably, yes. Guiltiness is the preoccupation with yourself, whether you are or aren't guilty. This preoccupation is all about warding off shame, which blocks concern for others. Well, maybe the first thing should be, and I know I'm just putting this out here, maybe the first thing should be, has a crime been committed that I should feel guilty for? Because as in your premier example, it sure sounded like Sylviolet was creating a mountain out of a nothing and holding Matthew to account for her paranoia. Is Matthew responsible for Sylviolet's paranoia? I don't think so. He criticizes her for buying too many slushies. She turns that, along with your help from your own example, into something that Matthew has to apologize for, feel guilty about, and shrink back from ever engaging about again. He's in the wrong for wanting to spend his money wisely. I mean, unless being an essayist and a spoken word poet brings in a real good income between the two of them, I'm assuming that on student loans and everything else, it's Matthew who's paying most of the way. But no, Matthew needs to apologize simply for criticizing spending habits. Questions of guilt. How about questions of the legitimacy of the complaint? Why are we focusing first on those that must just confess to wrongdoing? Is there no due process in relationships to arguments? Could someone incorrectly hold their partner account for something? Is that even possible? Is that worth discussing at all? I don't know. Thank you, Derek LaRue, as always. Like the new avatar, by the way. Appreciate your generosity and your support very much, as always. I hope I earn your generosity. A couple other hellos while I see people in the chat. Sorry, guys, I got so engrossed in the article. Jeanette E. Hellis, Texas Attorney General, secret agent. And did I miss anybody else? I probably did. Somnamnul Nation, did I not say hello? If I didn't. Resolute Germ, Ebony Williams, Bridget, Megan Ring, Shady Grin, and I think that's everyone. Hope so. All right, let's keep going. Questions over guilt hovered over another couple I worked with. Okay, second example. All right, he had recently cheated on his wife. Well, that would be a legitimate reason to feel guilty, and she would have a good complaint. They were generally deeply supportive of each other, but after she found out about his transgression, that's putting it mildly, I would say, she was terribly upset and also confused. Understandable. Their attempts to talk about what happened were halting. #MeToo rhetoric was woven into their discussions. Such as... functioning as a superego, shaping and inhibiting what they could even think. You got an example? She said that she felt that the lessons of the movement were telling her not to forgive but to leave him. Quote, especially now, if a woman is being wronged, you get out, unquote. Especially now. I don't know why you being betrayed and lied to by your partner, especially now, would be a reason to leave them if there wasn't any hope of salvaging the relationship. But okay. It was hard for her to know how she actually felt about it all. I think she was hurt and betrayed. Okay. Early on, he couldn't separate remorse from fear. He was terrified of getting into trouble. That's usually why people lie and obfuscate their actions. And guiltiness prevailed. His voice was hushed while he scrutinized me intently, worried about how he would be perceived. Quote, there are a lot of men in this business right now who have taken positions of power and used them to have sex with people, unquote. What business? Wait, what? Did she say what he would, what? So wait, okay. Man, this is becoming complex. So he had sex with a coworker or a subordinate or something. So, okay, well, first and foremost, this guy sounds like a slime ball, because if he cheated on his partner and his only concern is that he's going to be Me Too'd, yeah, this is not somebody, regardless of the movement itself or anything else, obviously his concerns have less to do with the relationship and more to do with himself. So she should probably dump him. That'd be my thought, but I don't know what the context of their relationship is. Maybe there are kids involved. Maybe there are other considerations. I don't know. They were both white and understood their oh, Jesus. What does their race have to do with it? All right, they're inherently privileged because of their skin color. Right? There's no one who is white who is in any other class than upper. They were both white and understood their privilege and were apologetic about it. All right, so you have two people who are apologizing for something they have no control over, I suppose, for your satisfaction. She often undid her own complaints. Quote, I levitate out, unquote, by having the thought, quote, oh, poor cis white woman, unquote. Yes, you are not fully human, by the way. You are just a cis white woman. You possess privilege, and so anything that you experience in life isn't legitimate on its face. Well, actually on your face, because your face is white. Yeah. So as a couples therapist, maybe you want to dissuade your clients from thinking of themselves in subhuman terms on the basis of their race, and instead legitimize their complaints and their emotions in their relationship as its own thing. Maybe you'd want to do that. Is that where you went with this? He was uncomfortable too. He talked about reading the news, quote, about another black or brown person being killed, and it's just like, I feel a little, well, I feel guilty, to be honest, to be sitting here, unquote. This relationship and the individuals involved in it are far more broken than I think is being described. The lessons, oh boy, the lessons of the Black Lives Matter movement. Well, the main lesson of Black Lives Matter movement is to understand where you're sending your money and what they are doing with it when it gets there. Is it being used for the purposes you intend, or is it going into someone's personal bank account so they can buy McMansions? But anyway, no, sorry. The lessons of the Black Lives Matter movement initially can provoke such paralyzing guilt and shame that people become defensive and stop fully thinking. Yeah. Well, I guess one of the lessons of the Black Lives Matter movement is if you're anything other than black, your opinion is irrelevant and your life is less impactful and meaningful. And especially if you're white, I guess. Is that the lesson that your clients learn from the Black Lives Matter movement? Yet over time, I've found the ideas can inspire deep psychological work, pushing people to reckon with the harm that has been done, the question of whom should be implicated, and the difference between virtue signaling and deeper concerns. Okay, well, if your client is sitting in a therapy room and his crime thus far is cheating on his partner, spouse, girlfriend, whatever it is, and he's sitting there trying to conjure up feelings of guilt over something he had nothing to do with in the death of other people he's never met, I think that person needs real therapy. Maybe. These are tough and important lessons that can carry over into intimate relationships. Yes, assuming guilt for something you didn't do. That is an important lesson. In this case, the husband described a new understanding about the ways he exercised power at work. Quote, hold on, have I been an ally? Has it just been optics? Unquote. I don't know. Did you take actions such that assisted somebody else in their career? Was that allyship or performative allyship? Anyway, these insights extend even to his way of speaking about his transgression. Wait, what does his attitude at work have to do with cheating on his wife? He betrayed her trust, he betrayed his vows, and then his first concern is what people are going to think of it, or what work is going to, again, dump the scumbag. If the lady has any sense, she should dump the scumbag. If what we're being told here is true. But anyway, these insights extend even to the way of speaking about his transgression. He had been rationalizing his behavior by saying that his wife was not giving him the attention he needed. Well, if that was even legitimate, and of course you can make that claim after the fact without doing, then perhaps there was a communication problem in the relationship, or he's making up excuses after the fact because he just wants to cheat on his wife. I don't know. But moving beyond what the couple called optics, now he was asking himself asking himself for a more thorough accounting of what his cheating was really about and how it affected his wife. He explained how lonely he was if she traveled. He felt left behind and discarded, a feeling deeply familiar to him from early childhood. Acknowledging his vulnerability was hard for him, but it opened up a series of honest conversations between them. Quote, "I convinced myself she does not desire me," he said. "I'm not the popular guy. I'm not the strong guy," unquote. He linked those feelings to insecurities he felt as a teenager when he suffered chronic teasing from kids at school for being perceived as effeminate. So you're going to prove your masculinity by cheating on your wife? Okay. Like I said, after the fact, it's easy to make up excuses. Communication would have been the better way to go before all this. But then I guess some couples, if they had the ability to communicate, they wouldn't end up in therapy. This new non-defensive way of talking, it sounds like the guy's making up excuses. Honestly, I don't know. I'm not the couple. I'm not in that relationship. Sounds like a bunch of bupkis to me, but to each their own. Non-defensive way of talking made it possible for her to understand how his transgression hit her where she felt most insecure. What? Hit her where she felt most insecure. I thought it was his insecurity. What? So wait, he's saying that he didn't feel like she found him attractive, that she didn't desire him, and that triggered his childhood insecurities over being teased as a kid for being quote unquote effeminate. And so in order to fight those feelings and to prove his virility and his masculinity, he decided to cheat on his wife. And now it's her? What? Okay, let me try that again. This new non-defensive way of talking sounds pretty defensive to me, making it possible for her to understand how his transgression hit her where she felt most insecure, and he could see it, generating remorse and forgiveness between them. Okay, she described how it had become easier for both of them to check themselves for their impact on the other person and quickly, quote, notice or apologize, unquote. In one session, she said, smiling, which might be legitimate or put on, quote, "You were a jerk to me yesterday, and then you apologized a couple hours later. You recognize that you took out your frustration there on me because I was an easy target," unquote. He realized that he stopped skimming over ways he caused others pain. Quote, "I actually was just thinking therapy and the Black Lives Matter movement have made me keenly aware of the words that just came out of my mouth and the understanding that she reacted adversely to that. Instead of me just going, we move on because that's awkward. There's a need now to address it," unquote. He brought up Black Lives Matter explicitly. I don't know whether to believe that or not, but whatever. He continued, quote, "Did I just upset you? What did I do to just upset you?" unquote. Okay. Again, I'm not a psychologist. I do, however, own a couch. Communication in relationships is of vital importance. Honesty in relationships is of vital importance. Walking around your partner on eggshells and questioning and being paranoid of every little gesture or move or sidelong glance and then becoming just absolutely frozen in fear that you've done something wrong is going too far in the other direction. There is a balance to strike. Sometimes it gets out of balance. You try to bring it back into balance. But what's being described there, it's like, did I make you mad? How did I make you mad? Please tell me how I can make it better. That doesn't sound like an attractive relationship, either side of the equation. But okay. Couples work always, boy, do I have aphasia or something? Couples work always goes back to the challenge of otherness. Oh yeah, what happened to radical otherness? Where did the radical otherness go? Differences can show up around philosophical questions like what is important to devote a life to, or whether it is ethical to have babies with a climate crisis looming. I got news for you. Climate is going to be here regardless of your choice to have children. So, do you want a kid? Are you ready for a kid? Are you prepared? Hey, go have a kid. It'll be fun. It'll be an adventure. There you go. Or it can be closer to home, like whether having a sexual fantasy about a person who is not your partner is acceptable. Oh, it's always acceptable. It's always acceptable. As long as you take out that energy on your partner, it's always acceptable. Or even as seemingly trivial as the correct way to load a dishwasher. Or which way to load the toilet paper roll. Anyway, whatever the issue, differences can become a point of crisis in the relationship. Depending, it's possible. Yeah. Immediately, the question of who is right, who gets their way, or who has a better handle on reality pops up. Some people actually have a handle on reality and other people don't. Do you just submit to people who don't because you don't want to have a conflict? Narcissistic vulnerabilities about self-worth appear, which then trigger an impulse to devalue the other. Partners try to resolve such impasses by digging in and working hard to convince the other of their own position, becoming further polarized. It all depends on the circumstances. Sometimes one person is demonstrably wrong and the other person is demonstrably right. Not being willing to admit fault is also a problem. It's not that there's always a happy medium between one side and the other. But then, I don't know what we're talking about. The challenge of otherness may be easiest to see when we think of racial difference. Oh, jeez. Yes, by reducing everybody down to the lowest common denominator of their skin color, things are easier to see. This was certainly true for James and Michelle. Michelle was a calm, gentle, somewhat reserved African-American social worker, and James, at the time a police officer, was a slight, wiry white man whose face did not reveal much feeling. They came in with classic conflicts around division of labor and differing parenting styles, and then the pandemic hit. Quarantined, working remotely, and homeschooling their 3-year-old son, they started fighting about COVID protocols. If he was a police officer, he had to go out, right? Okay, they started fighting about COVID protocols. Michelle was aware of the way that COVID was devastating Black communities, unlike any other community. Or are you talking about the lockdowns? Because conflating COVID, the pandemic, with the actual, effects of governmental decisions on the whole situation are different things, but all right. Devastating Black communities and wanted to be careful. James, along with his fellow officers and his conservative parents, thought the concern was overblown. Well, time and that's born. I can't get too deep into this because YouTube will spike me. So, discussion about how race shaped James and Michelle's experiences and ideas routinely dead-ended. If Michelle tried to bring up the topic, James would insist, "I don't see color," and say he didn't know what she was talking about. Oh boy. In our sessions, Michelle sounded hopeless. She wanted him to understand how traumatizing COVID had been for Black people, but she was frustrated by his inability to acknowledge real difference, as if everyone was the same race. Because as we know, COVID, the virus, is racist. The situation affecting the world, the lockdowns, the quarantines, the mandates, they were racist. They only affected one demographic, as we know. Quote, he's of the mindset that I don't see color. She continued setting out his thinking. Quote, I don't want to hear what you have to say because that's not how I think, unquote. No, I don't see color is the principle of not using race as a value factor in assessing people or situations, unless there's some explicit reason to do so. That point of view, quote, obviously angers me, unquote, she said. He disagreed with you. You tried to see the world through a lens of race, and he disagreed with you. James would shrug, expressionless. Michelle was describing the infuriating experience of trying to break through a barrier. Her husband wasn't consciously aware that whiteness was a perspective that was constricting what he could imagine or comprehend. But on the flip side of it, Michelle wasn't being blinded by blackness. No. She had the correct perspective. His was wrong because of his skin color. Okay. Well, here's the thing, and here's, I guess, the ultimate problem in that relationship. Their skin colors aren't going to change. And so if you assess someone as possessing a viewpoint that cannot change and is inherent on the basis of their skin color, and one believes it on the basis of their skin color, the other believes that the skin color is not changing, which means that you're always going to suspect that the other person is not being honest with you if you believe that their skin color defines their perspective. So if James suddenly started agreeing with Michelle, how could Michelle trust he was being honest? How could she trust he wasn't being performatively agreeable? If you know that he has a perspective of whiteness, if you know that his skin color has indemnified him from thinking about any other perspective, then anything he says in the contrary is obviously a lie, right? After George Floyd was murdered and protests of all kinds erupted across the country, the dynamic between James and Michelle started to shift. I can only imagine. Psychoanalysts are often interested in people's fantasies, the scenarios running under the hood of conscious thought that expresses hidden desires and fears. When I asked James and Michelle about theirs, they shared apocalyptic ones. Each was imagining a full-on race war. Well, when you've helped them winnow down their arguments to race, I can't imagine why they would think that was a possibility. I can't imagine. Michelle imagined loss of all contact and trust between black people and white people. Oh, you imagine that. Well, what exactly is being engendered in the example provided by our author here, except to just accept distrust between people of different races, because obviously they're never going to see the same. My brain, it doth break. Okay, apologies. Michelle imagined loss of all contact and trust between black people and white people. James, who seemed uncharacteristically tense, saw himself on one side of a divide and was envisioning an, quote, all-out physical combat. Well, if James is a police officer and he was operating under the cloud of sentiment that was for law enforcement at the time of George Floyd, I can't imagine why he might be concerned, either for his career and his livelihood or his physical safety. I can't imagine. I cannot imagine. Envisioning an all-out physical combat. Quote, with whom, I asked. Quote, with anybody outside of this household. Anybody that tries to come and take anything from us because they're struggling to survive and they start looting to feed their family, they're now coming to my house, unquote. Yet over time, as the conversation about Black lives continued, his own identifications became more complex and nuanced. He still felt loyalty to his fellow police officers and his conservative family, but he became aware that those feelings were now in tension with Michelle's beliefs and what he was witnessing on the news about police violence against Black men and loud public demand for police reform. So he had loyalty to his fellow police officers. He loved his family, but Michelle didn't like him being loyal to his fellow police officers or loving his family. So he had to find some happy medium where he was distancing himself from his loyalty to his coworkers and his family, and also giving into Michelle's paranoia. Okay, that's what I'm reading. That's what I'm getting out of this. James's changing internal landscape was reflected in his clear distress about, quote, the all-out chaos that a large conflict can bring if we're further divided in this country. You wouldn't know who to trust from place to place, unquote. Well, if we're talking about the time during 2020 and the summer of love, I don't blame James, especially from his perspective as a law enforcement officer. Not knowing whom to trust also meant he could no longer trust his old belief system in which it was clear who was good and who was bad. Well, there are people following the law and there are people breaking the law. That's kind of the dividing line. But so if someone came to their house and broke in to steal stuff, they're no longer bad people? What? This disruption was creating new concerns and fantasies. Rather than fearing looters, he now feared polarization. Quote, Michelle might be able to seek refuge somewhere where I might get shunned or vice versa, unquote. Yes, if you reduce everything down to race and you promote an idea of racial division and racial superiority or denigration based on assumed thought patterns or belief systems because of skin color, oh, author who brings up race and class in her therapy sessions unbidden, yes, you might have a society where that is a truism. He was terrified that they wouldn't be able to keep their young child safe. Interestingly, engaging with the question of systemic racism, did not polarize Michelle and James, but rather help them to do the important psychological work that I doubt I, as their therapist, could have inspired in them on my own. Something began to shift inside James, and he was no longer assuming sameness. He was no longer imposing his version of reality on Michelle, but rather accepting Michelle's paranoid delusions as fact. Oh, sorry, no, that was me talking. Sorry. He was no longer imposing his version of reality on Michelle, but rather mentalizing, understanding his and her mental states as separate and different subjective experiences. Thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and desires. In a meaningful moment, he said, quote, I know it hits her harder than it does me, unquote. I was moved to hear James plainly state, quote, we can never truly know what each other goes through because we're not each other. So all we can do is be in as much understanding as possible, unquote. Okay, so if your partner is unreasonably and irrationally paranoid about something, then you just, pat them on the head, say, there, I understand, and join in the party? You don't try to reassure them. You don't try to show them, hopefully, depending on the circumstances, of course, that maybe they're overreacting. Oh, of course they're overreacting because now my feelings are illegitimate. No, I'm just saying that you're overreacting. Not that your reaction is inherently bad, but you might be putting too much into it. No, just capitulate. Just retreat. Just retreat. Notice how in all of her examples so far, seemingly, except for the guy, except for the guy that cheated. I don't quite understand how that one was supposed to work out. He did a bad thing. He tried to rationalize it after the fact. And then the wife was, supposed to accept it? I don't know. I don't know what's going on here. Somebody's done something right and or not done something wrong. And they have to give in to the rationalization, paranoia, or definitions of the other partner. You have the first lady who was spending money that they shouldn't spend, and he starts criticizing her spending habits, and then suddenly he has to apologize because she came up poor or something. Then you have the guy who cheats on his wife, and then she has to accept his childhood trauma as an excuse for his cheating on her. And now you've got a guy who's a police officer who's having to, fight with his wife over her paranoia over things on the basis of race and now just give in to it. That makes for healthy relationships. Okay. Michelle, who often described herself as guarded, also began to drop her defensive posture. Really? She was looking at him fondly, her voice warmer. Quote, these are things that I never really heard him fully articulate, particularly about his insecurities and feeling caught in the middle. Well, yeah, when you reduce him down to his skin color and you have to alienate him from his family because it makes you uncomfortable. That's helpful for me to hear because it makes me more conscious and aware of how he's feeling. No, he's trying to please two sides of the issue. He loves you, but also loves his family. He wants to address your concerns, but he's also a police officer and has to rely on the people around him because it can be a war zone out there. He's stuck in the middle because you're not being fair to him. But he still wants to try to make you happy. So he's willing to sacrifice his family, his opinions, and everything else to try to make you happy. Oh, I'm consciously aware of how he's feeling. Yeah, but you're going to still, what, take advantage of it, right? You're not going to try to accommodate what he wants as long as he accommodates what you want. Again, I have very little to go on here, but holy cats. For the first time, they were entertaining multiple perspectives. Love is ultimately measured by people's capacity to see and care about the other person as they are and as a skin color. Oh, sorry, no, I added that. Succeeding in this effort is how people in relationships grow. Wow. Wowie, wow, wow. Actually, I think I need an official wowie, wow, wow.
Wowie, wow, wow.
Well, there you go. Radical otherness, couples therapy, capitulate to your partner's sense of wrongdoings or actual wrongdoings. I don't know. Again, I am not a psychologist. I do own a couch. I'd be curious to know what your guys' thoughts on this in the comments below, but I'll take a minute here and look over in the chat. Miranda Stone, yay, overreaction party. I mean, you know, someone can overreact to something legitimately concerning, right? It's just like, how much of this deserves as much attention as you're giving it, how much energy you're putting into it. Trying to regulate that or moderate that isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's not necessarily saying you're 100% wrong in what you're thinking, but let's just try to turn the volume down for a second and try to look at it objectively. But of course, people who are so invested in their overreaction and their paranoia and their delusion about the world see anything pushing back against it as an all-out attack. But in this case, well, obviously, husband is wrong because wife is right, I guess. Let's see. Michelle Mabel, those are words that go together well. Michelle Mabel? Okay. Well, sure. I like a little poetry. Resolute Germ, she was demonstrably wrong on all fronts, and he should not be humoring her. Well, love does funny things to people, and especially if there's a kid involved and you have a family and a life together and everything else. Yeah, there are complexities and nuances. I don't think they necessarily dissolve down to race and class all the time, as our authors seem to imply. But yeah, I again, just from the facts that we were delivered, it sounded like in the last example, James was trying to mediate between his career and his family, his birth family, let's say, his family, and then his wife, his child, and his home life. Trying to mediate between those two things and trying to find a place where she wasn't always mad at him and he wasn't always in the wrong. And making those kind of compromises in relationships are often necessary, some way, shape, or form. They're not always fun. Sometimes they seem unfair. Maybe they are. But here's the thing. What concessions or compromises was Michelle willing to make? Because it sure seemed like it was on James to make the most changes in the relationship and his perspective in order to accommodate Michelle. And if James is the only one making compromises, if James is the only one making sacrifices for the sake of the household, you still have an imbalanced relationship, and it's still not going to go well in the long run. That's just my opinion, though. Untrained, unpsychoanalyzed, professionist. Yeah. Jamie Jam, he sounds like a person who loves his wife and wants to help her through the pandemic. That too. Or just, make everything copacetic. How much negotiation do you have to do just to have a tolerable home life? Jeanette E. Hellis, I'd never go to this couple's therapist. Rude and taking every social issue and inserting it into a personal relationship. Absolutely not. Yeah. People's relationships may be affected by the events of the day and the social ebb and flow of the hour. But ultimately, it comes down to some basic interactions between human beings outside of necessarily the specifics of what's happening in the news today. and to, as you say, inserting these things into the conversation before they even come up, if they're even relevant at all. As she said, she in the 90s, she used to bring up race and class and she'd get an awkward response. But now, like never before, it's just part and parcel with everything. She must be very excited. Very excited. But anyway, again, let me know what you thought in the comments. Be sure to hit that like button on the way out. Programming note, Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern will be another episode of TED Excellence. We'll take a look at another off-brand TED Talk for education and fun. I call it Funidation. Yeah, that's what it is. Also, I have a Discord. It is an exclusive Discord for my audience. How do I know you're one of my audience? Well, you know the secret word. Because if you go to that Discord link I just put into the chat, you'll find yourself on the Say Hello channel. All you have to do in the Say Hello channel, aside from saying hello, is to give me and my moderators the secret word for this stream. And we'll know that you watched, and then you can become a member of the Discord. What's today's secret word? Today's secret word is radical. Yes, radical. Go back to the 80s when things were fun. Radical. Everyone, thank you for joining me for this little stream. It's only, I guess I went over an hour. Holy cats. Again, hit the like button. Let me know what you think in the comments. Moderators, thank you for keeping an eye on things. Even though everyone here is so well behaved, you have very little to do. Everybody who donated either to myself or to the fundraisers pinned to the top of the chat box, thank you so much for your generosity. I really do appreciate it. Hope you all have a good rest of your Monday and your week. I hope you are all safe and well. If you are not well, please get well soon, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.